We are going to leave the House of Commons now and take you to Hyde Park. Ceremonial event since the Queen died yesterday afternoon at Balmoral is about to take place. Gun salutes are about to ring out across the United Kingdom to mark the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
Number two! Number two! Number one! Load! Three! Number two!
This is called the Death Gun Salute, and it is taking place, as you can see, in every corner of the United Kingdom. Cardiff Castle, Edinburgh Castle, Hillsborough Castle, York, Portsmouth, abroad too, in Gibraltar and many other places. One round being fired every 10 seconds or so. 96 rounds in total, representing one round for every year of the Queen's life.
Number three! Fire! Three! Fire! Number one! Fire! One! Fire! Number three gun! Fire!
So the gun salutes ringing out right across the United Kingdom. The first ceremonial event, the main event since the Queen's death yesterday afternoon. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me here in the studio, and these gun salutes, the tradition, it dates back centuries, doesn't it?
It does, to mark significant moments in the nation's life as the King flies from Aberdeen to return to London, as bells are sounded at churches across the country and flowers are laid, and the nation begins its period of mourning, this first formal expression of that national mourning, this gun salute, as you say, of 96 rounds, fired by different branches of the armed forces, by the Army and the Royal Navy, at more than a dozen different locations around the United Kingdom, in the capital city, in both Hyde Park, with the King's Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery, and at the Tower of London, with the Honourable Artillery Company. And in the other national capitals, at Cardiff Castle, at Edinburgh Castle and Hillsborough Castle, near Belfast, and in other cities within the United Kingdom, as you mentioned, at York, Portsmouth and Gibraltar, and we also saw gun salutes being fired at Stonehenge and in Jersey, in the Channel Islands.
And all this taking place as the new King, King Charles III, makes his way now from Aberdeen Airport. He took off 40 minutes ago, heading down to London at the start of very public duties, at a time of very private grief and pain.
Yes, at the start of what is going to be a very challenging moment for King Charles. He is expected to be landing at Northolt shortly, perhaps within the next half hour or so, and there he is boarding the aircraft in Aberdeen a few moments ago, accompanied of course by Camilla, the Queen Consort, and his immediate officials. They're boarding this RAF aircraft. Charles, of course, who was at his mother's bedside yesterday afternoon when she passed away at about 4:30. Also there, we understand, was the Princess Royal. The Queen died before those other members of the royal family arrived at Balmoral. They arrived at around 5:30. So it now falls to King Charles, to lead the nation's mourning and to become that figure of reassurance and stability, that focus for unity that his mother was for those 70 years. Now, this is no easy task. It wouldn't be easy for anyone to succeed to the throne after the reign, the long reign, of such a revered monarch. Charles has had many, many years to think about it. He's the longest serving heir to the throne who has finally succeeded. He is the oldest person to succeed to the throne in British history. But he is now on his way to London. He will go to Buckingham Palace. He, I imagine, will see the many flowers that are being left there. He may well read some of the tributes that are being left by ordinary members of the public. And there we see these hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are gathering, not just at Buckingham Palace, but at other royal palaces. There is this need, I think, for people to feel that they're coming together.
And people have been arriving at Buckingham Palace since even before the official news was confirmed yesterday afternoon, coming in very large numbers, leaving messages, leaving flowers, messages of thanks. And people keep talking about just the atmosphere there, how quiet it is, how sombre it is.
Yes, that's right. It was pouring with rain. We were sitting here yesterday afternoon waiting for any further news from Buckingham Palace, and you're right. We could already see many people who just felt that at this significant moment, because clearly it was going to be a significant moment, they were already starting to gather outside Buckingham Palace in what was the very inclement weather yesterday afternoon. And of course those numbers have increased. And people were there, if not throughout the night, certainly into the early hours of this morning, and then again very early this morning. Just, as you say, wanting to be part of this, individuals wanting to pay their private tributes, whether it's leaving some flowers or leaving a card, expressing their thoughts at this significant moment in the nation's life. We are going to see, I sense, a level of mourning, of public and national mourning in this country that we have not seen since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. We will have the lying in state of the Queen in Westminster Hall. That will, I'm sure, attract many hundreds of thousands of people who will wish to pay their respects by the coffin of the late Queen in Westminster Hall. That recalls, of course, the scenes in 2002 when the Queen Mother died, when she lay in state, and the numbers who came, who queued for hours and hours just to pass by the coffin and to think their private thoughts and pay their private tributes. People, I think, feel compelled at this moment just to be there, to be part of this. So this process beginning with the sounding of bells, the firing of these death gun salutes. There, the flag, I think, of the Royal Navy at one of the locations. All, of course, carefully worked out. The plans for this operation, codenamed London Bridge, have been worked out many years ago. The finishing touches will be being put to those plans over the next 24 hours. We expect to learn when the state funeral will take place. That will be a public holiday, a day of national mourning. We don't know the date for that yet. But I would imagine that it would be 10, 11, 12 days after the day of death. Before that, the lying in state. And before that, these many expressions, the acts of condolence books online, the laying of flowers. And this afternoon, once the Prime Minister, once the King arrives in London, he will have an audience with the new Prime Minister. Quite bizarre, really, isn't it? Both new in their jobs. It will be for both of them the first time that they have attended an audience. Liz Truss, of course, had the audience with the Queen on Tuesday, at which she was appointed, but she has not had an audience with the monarch, and the monarch has not had an audience with the Prime Minister. So that will take place this afternoon. Parliament will be suspended. There will be a broadcast, the King's address, at round about 6 o'clock this evening, we think. And shortly after that, there will be a service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, a service of prayer and reflection on the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
And the Prime Minister said that she spoke to the new King last night by phone. As you say, she will meet with him this afternoon in person for the first time since he has become King. But she said that the sense of duty and service, his sense of duty and service is very clear. And it is this sense of continuity as well, which is going to be crucial at this point in the monarchy.
Yes, continuity, I mean, that is, I suppose, self-evident. I think the greater challenge is for Charles to embody the sense of unity that the monarch must represent, and for him to be seen to be a stabilising force at this moment when there are uncertainties anyway, because of politics, because of economics and so on and so forth. And at this significant moment of uncertainty, we have lost our head of state, that figure who has been that reassuring figure for so many years, to whom the nation has been able to turn at moments of difficulty, and who has always found those reassuring words. And I think the King will wish to show very quickly, and we will get a sense of this in his address tonight, that he will be that head of the nation reassuring figure that at this of all times he needs to be, as the nation is mourning, as he and his family are mourning. But he now will have the responsibility and the duty to stabilise feelings around the nation and to lead that national mourning.
Nicholas Witchell, for now, thank you. And let's take you back now to the House of Commons, scenes there where for the past hour or so MPs have been gathering, meeting and sharing their reflections, their thoughts, their memories of the Queen. The former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, spoke, and he spoke of his deep and personal sorrow, loss of her loss. He said that we had all been lulled into thinking that she might be eternal, and that we may now understand in her death the full magnitude of what she did as Queen. Well, our correspondent Daniel Sanford has been listening and reports now on the day's events so far.
Less than 24 hours after his mother's death, the grief still raw, King Charles III at Aberdeen Airport preparing to leave for London, where this evening he will address the nation as its new monarch. As well as mourning his mother, he now has to pick up the mantle of leadership as the head of state of 15 countries and the head of the Commonwealth. At noon, bells rang out in abbeys and cathedrals across the country to mark the passing of the UK's longest-serving monarch. Moments later, MPs assembled in Parliament.
Order, order. I invite the House to rise and observe a minute's silence in memory of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II.
The cut and thrust of political debate silenced. This, a time only for tributes.
Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. She was the rock on which modern Britain was built. She came to the throne at just 25, in a country that was emerging from the shadow of war. She bequeaths a modern, dynamic nation that has grown and flourished under her reign. The United Kingdom is the great country it is today because of her.
Today, our country, our people, this House, are united in mourning. Queen Elizabeth II was this great country's greatest monarch. And for the vast majority of us, it feels impossible to imagine a Britain without her. All our thoughts are with her beloved family, our royal family, at this moment of profound grief.
Today, there are countless people in this country and around the world who have experienced the same sudden access of unexpected emotion. And I think millions of us are trying to understand why we are feeling this deep and personal and almost familial sense of loss. Perhaps it's partly that she's always been there, a changeless human reference point in British life.
As people gathered at Buckingham Palace, the Queen's London home, the Premier League announced it was postponing the weekend's fixtures. The last night of the proms has already been cancelled. We are entering a period of royal mourning and national mourning. Among those who were at the palace, 2 Chelsea pensioners who had met the Queen.
Ordinary people she would put at ease, and she just had that wonderful ability to be personable to people.
Precious. As a queen, as a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother.
I don't know, I just had to come. Just had to put some flowers down. Yeah.
Just to be here and to see everyone come together, all these people walking out of Green Park with the flowers, just very moving. So I just felt today I had to be here.
Her death dominates today's front pages of newspapers from around the world, in a way that only a few events do in each generation. The country is now preparing for the formal process of marking the passing of the monarch, the lying in state, the funeral, the end of the era of Queen Elizabeth II. Daniel Sanford, BBC News.
Well, let's take you now to Balmoral, the gates of Balmoral, where the Queen passed away yesterday afternoon, and crowds there who have been coming to pay their respects, just as they have at many royal residences right around the country, leaving flowers, leaving messages, standing, reflecting on what has happened. Our correspondent Sarah Campbell is at Balmoral for us. And Sarah, we saw not that long ago the new king leave Balmoral with the Queen Consort, with Camilla. They've gone to Aberdeen Airport. They are currently in the air, heading down towards London. They're expected at about 20 to 2 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the rest of the royal members of the family are still there.
Well, I mean, this place is somewhere the Queen is said to have cherished. You can see why. She spent many months here enjoying the beauty in this remote part of the Scottish Highlands. And it was her family rushing to be here yesterday afternoon, just 24 hours ago, that really alerted us to the seriousness of this situation. So overnight, as you say, the new King and the new Queen Consort stayed here. Princess Anne, the Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex were also here, along with her grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry. It was, said the new King, a moment of the greatest sadness for him and his family, a reminder that as well as being a global figure, she was, to them, a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother. There have been movements this morning. This morning, Prince Harry left first thing. Just a few minutes ago, Prince William left to make the journey back down to Windsor and to see his family. And as you say, just after 11 o'clock, the new King, King Charles III, left here with the Queen Consort. Less than 24 hours since his mother died, but he must now manage his personal grief and assume the role that she carried out so flawlessly for the last 70 years. And among those initial duties, it includes finalising the details for her funeral and the period of mourning. And those details this afternoon are starting to emerge. As you say, throughout the morning, people have come, they have left tributes. Balmoral is somewhere the Queen, as we know, spent a lot of time, and the people here felt that she was very much a part of the community. She was a member of the congregation of the nearby Crathy Kirk, and so they are feeling this quite personally today. People that I've spoken to, very upset at the loss of the Queen, very upset at the speed with which, let's not remember that it was only on Tuesday that she was photographed here meeting the new Prime Minister. Yes, looking frail, but she was smiling. So I think that is why it has been such a surprise to people. If I just read you out one of the tributes that struck me, it said, "Thank you for your dedication, service and reign. You have been a source of inspiration and a calming figure throughout my life. You will be sadly missed. Rest in peace." Sophie.
Sarah Campbell at Balmoral, thank you. Well, let's take you back to the House of Commons now. Our chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley, is there. MPs continue to pay tribute to the Queen. And Nick, some really moving tributes that we've heard already, and also reflecting on the Queen's humour. A lot of people talking about the Queen's humour, her cheeky sense of humour.
Absolutely, Sophie. Of course, the normal cut and thrust of politics will be suspended for some time, but the House of Commons chamber is packed. It sat largely in silence to hear tributes to the Queen, but also there were moments of wry smiles and even laughter as politicians recalled their encounters with the monarch. I think it's a sign of the unique regard that the Queen was held with here at Westminster, that there is such a long list of people wanting to line up and pay tribute to her. The Prime Minister Liz Truss talked of her as one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said it was impossible to imagine Britain without her. But some of the most interesting and most touching tributes have come from those who knew her best. Her former Prime Ministers who had those weekly audiences at Buckingham Palace and elsewhere with the Queen. Boris Johnson saying that the Queen had been as wise as anyone he'd ever met. Theresa May saying she was the most remarkable woman she'd ever encountered. So there is a sense of sadness here today, but also a sense of celebration, and I think a sense of change too. Remember, it's only 3 days since the new Prime Minister was sworn in by the Queen at Balmoral. We now have a new monarch too, only a few hours into his reign. The two of them will have their first audience together at some point this afternoon, a real visual embodiment of the changes at the top of the British state, but also a sense of continuity, that the constitutional monarchy continues.
Nick Eardley in Westminster, thank you. Well, the Queen chose to spend most of her later years at her official residence of Windsor Castle instead of Buckingham Palace in London. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been to Windsor this morning, speaking to people who have gathered to pay tribute.
Windsor has become a place of mournful silence. Crowded but still. Reflection amid tranquility. We can see that it means a lot.
Yeah, it does. It's very sad.
What does she mean to you?
I think she means everything, doesn't she, to the world. She was everything, wasn't she? She's just an incredible lady, and it's just incredibly sad.
Thousands have made the castle's Cambridge Gate a haven for unspoken emotion, for private contemplation. What did the Queen mean to you?
She's the Queen of my hometown, so everything. Literally everything. So, yeah.
And Georgia, how much of a special woman was she to you?
She was very special. We don't know like a king. She's reigned our country for so long, and yeah, it's going to be so very different. Yes, yeah, very sad.
Laura and Preet are close friends and felt a joint pull to this assembly of the curious and the sad.
I've taken my daughter out of school because this is a moment in history and I wanted her to be here.
She's been one constant in my life ever since I was born, and it's a day in history, and I just felt it was the right thing to do to be here today and pay our respects.
Like so many places, Windsor has become a home to those absorbed by the end of reign, the finality of a monumental presence. Sam Cader was inspired by the Queen for his close companions.
A very historic day, a very sad day, but almost to see that it was real. It's been such a constant. It's the first stamp I saw, the very first banknote I held, had her head on it. And I think today was just the first day of a bit of healing.
In a burst of subdued activity, Windsor has been transformed. For Sandra Riley, the Queen was someone who connected with people and their inner pride for a country and its ideals. Why have you come?
Because she was our respects. Yes. And she was the Queen, we loved her. And my birthday was the same day as her, and I'd give her a card every year.
Not everyone here is a royalist. Today has drawn the curious, the intrepid. Respect and fascination lay like buds and stems. One person said simply, the Queen feels like family. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, at Windsor Castle.
Well, let's take you now through some of the key moments that we expect over the coming 10 days or so. Many of the exact dates are still to be confirmed, but tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the Accession Council, which includes senior government figures and Privy Councillors, will meet at St James's Palace for the formal proclamation of Charles as King. Now, that will be broadcast live here on BBC One for the first time in history. Until now, that has always remained behind closed doors. The Queen's coffin is expected to leave Balmoral on Sunday to be taken by road to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. There will then be a ceremonial procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles's Cathedral for a service attended by members of the royal family. The coffin will remain at St Giles's Cathedral for a period of lying at rest. The Queen's coffin will then be flown to London. It will arrive at Buckingham Palace for a few hours and then travel to Westminster Hall, where hundreds of thousands of people will be allowed to file past over a period of about 4 days of lying in state. In this time, King Charles will visit Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. And then we expect the state funeral to be held in 10 days or so. That will be held at Westminster Abbey. The exact date will be confirmed soon by Buckingham Palace. Well, let's talk again to Nicholas Witchell and the Queen's coffin lying in state in Westminster sometime next week, and that will bring back for very many people, memories of the Queen Mother when that happened, and the huge scenes, the enormous crowds that turned out right through the night. People were coming in the early hours of the morning, all through the night, just to file past.
I think it surpassed every expectation in 2002, 20 years ago, when the Queen Mother died, just ahead of, course, the Golden Jubilee in February of 2002. And I remember being down there on the morning when the lying in state started, and I was suddenly aware of lots of people arriving from every direction, and they were bringing blankets and picnic baskets. And I think nobody had quite expected so many people to feel moved and feel compelled to be there for the lying in state. And of course there were, I don't know the exact figure, but there were hundreds of thousands, far more than had been expected. They had to introduce sort of 2 lines of mourners passing on either side of the coffin, extend the hours. And I would be very surprised if the same thing doesn't happen again, that we see mass mourning on a scale that we haven't seen for 20 years. Of course, all the details are in this weighty document that has been drawn up and which has been ready for many years. The document that is under the code name of London Bridge, there's a copy of it here, as you can see from the size of it, it covers every eventuality, but that needs to be now to be updated with the final details which need to be approved by the King. And you've explained already that there will be the Accession Council at St James's Palace tomorrow, which, as you mentioned, is to be televised. And the King will swear an oath. He doesn't need to swear that oath to be King. And one of the senior heralds, Garter King of Arms, will proclaim the fact that his reign has started. He will proclaim that publicly in Friars Court at St James's Palace. Now that, of course, a scene that we haven't witnessed for 70 years, since the start of Elizabeth's reign. Then, after the coffin, after its short period in Edinburgh, will be returned to London and to Westminster Hall for the lying in state. And then finally the state funeral, and of course we haven't seen a state funeral in this country since that of Winston Churchill in 1965. It is very rare for anyone other than a head of state to have the full panoply of a state funeral. It's not that dissimilar in appearance to other funerals, ceremonial royal funerals that we've seen in more recent years, but there are significant differences, and it just has this status as a state funeral. It has been approved by Parliament. It is the final opportunity to pay respects to the outgoing monarch. So that, I would expect, would be, as you said, in about 10 or 11 days. So much depends on what day of the week the death occurs, and they need to then map out all these other components to ensure that there is an opportunity. It can't take place on a Sunday. It will be a public holiday. It will be a day of national mourning. It might, and I stress that this is just me speculating, it might possibly be on that Monday the 19th, but we really do need to wait for official acknowledgement or information from Buckingham Palace. And there
yes. Is the plane carrying King Charles, arriving, making very quick time, arriving into RAF Northolt, which is West London. It's about 13 or 14 miles away from the centre of London, Buckingham Palace, which is where the King and the Queen Consort, Queen Camilla, will be heading. They only left less than an hour ago from Aberdeen, and quite a moment for King Charles as he returns to London.
It is, yeah. This is a private charter flight which went up to Aberdeen to collect him. It's not the same aircraft that took the other members of the royal family up. That was an RAF aircraft. This, as I say, a private charter flight. Now coming into RAF Northolt, and then there will be the journey that, of course, we saw the new Prime Minister making just a couple of days ago. In her case to Downing Street, but the Metropolitan Police will be whisking the new King and the Queen Consort and their immediate officials not to Clarence House, which of course would be where they would normally return to when they come to London, but that in itself is a sign of the considerable, profound change that has occurred, he will be going to Buckingham Palace, and we would expect that quite possibly they will look at the floral tributes that are there and look at some of the cards that are being left and perhaps meet some of the mourners who are there. But there is other business, other important business for the King to be doing. He will be meeting with the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, this afternoon. That first formal conversation between the new King and the new Prime Minister. And he will be preparing for the broadcast, the King's address, which we expect will be going out at around 6 o'clock tonight. Again, I stress that all of these timings are subject to confirmation and clarification. And there will be many things that he will be wanting to consider, many plans. Although they're already drawn up, they will just need to be finally looked at, and he will want to ensure that when he visits the four nations, and over the next few days he can be expected to be visiting Cardiff and Edinburgh and Northern Ireland, and he will be, I'm sure, making speeches in each of those capital cities. And again, these initial speeches will be very important, setting the tone for his reign.
And it does feel like it is a real moment of change now. We've briefly glimpsed the King as he boarded the plane, but there the royal car is lined up on the tarmac waiting to take him, the royal standard flying above it. A real moment of change, a very familiar figure, Prince Charles as we have always known him, now King Charles III with Queen Camilla.
And there is the inevitable comparison, Sophie, with the scenes that we are all familiar with from the newsreels of the return to this country of Queen Elizabeth, who left this country as Princess Elizabeth in February 1952, was seen off by her father, George VI, who was seriously ill, though nobody quite realised how ill he was. And she, of course, had to cut short that tour of Africa, and she was planning to go on to the Far East, had to cut that short and return to London, being flown by BOAC, landing at a very early Heathrow airport and being met on the tarmac by the royal limousines. And here we are about to see a modern day equivalent of that scenario unfolding. This jet aircraft which has brought the King and the Queen Consort from Aberdeen to London, to RAF Northolt, not, as we understand it, not to be met by any cabinet ministers, but to be met by the vehicles which are drawn up. And I think I noticed that it is the Queen's vehicle. It's the sovereign's, the monarch's vehicle, the large vehicle that it is. And that is the vehicle that in a few moments will take the King and the Queen Consort, to Buckingham Palace. And a sense really that this reign then is beginning, because yesterday was a day for family mourning when the family was all together up there at Balmoral Castle with their own thoughts, but now a return to the capital and the beginning of the formal work as King, meeting the Prime Minister, preparing to address the nation, preparing for the days of mourning, preparing for the task that falls on his shoulders to be that figure of reassurance and stability.
And as that door opens, it all becomes very public, doesn't it? For the new King, he's had hours of private grief, and now it turns to a very public duty. He will be seen right around the country in the next few days, right around the world. These images will be beamed everywhere.
Yes, you're right. He's stepping out of the private opportunity to grieve now onto the public stage that he will occupy for the next, well, who knows how many years as King. But this really is the moment when the work as monarch begins. That one of the older vehicles from the royal fleet, but flying the royal standard, the monarch's sovereign flying on that vehicle.